No, these are flood. Because these are flood related, I think all right, I'm going to skip my report. Courtney?
I'm going to skip mine too.
Okay.
For the good of the community.
Yeah, for the greater good. Very good. We're going to dive right in. I'm just going to take resolutions as they come today instead of looking for consent because we might have questions on flood-related issues. RS 2019-1801 approves a participation agreement by and between the Metro Government through the Department of Public Works, the City of Ridgetop, and the Robertson County Highway Department for the pavement of Greer Road. We've got a letter to approve. I would accept a motion to approve.
Second.
A motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Moving on to RS 2019-1802, authorizes the acquisition and removal of 45 flood-prone properties in the 7 Mile Creek watershed. I would accept a motion to approve. Need a second?
Thanks.
All right, I will ask Water, for all of the, so we've got various flood-prone properties. Is this just a new tranche? Can you explain the timing of how these all came about right at this moment?
Oh, well,
yeah.
we have several different projects going on at the same time. So we had a similar project on Mill Creek. These 45 are on 7 Mile Creek. Most of them happen to be in District 26.
Yep.
But it's just, it's Corps of Engineers, 65% their money, 35% our money. The other ones on Saunders, we're doing those with 100% local money because we had the need to buy them out and there was no federal program we could get them into, but they flooded twice in February.
Okay.
And so we took the opportunity to take them out as opposed to letting them rebuild and reflood and rebuild and reflood. And then the other, so yeah, they're just different projects going on.
All right, very good. Other questions, Councilor?
So in this buyout, do you have a specific, it's like a damage is more than greater than 50%, 60%, or do you have any kind of those, condition in order for you to, the eligible for the buyout?
Okay, on these, the ones that are going through the Corps of Engineers project, the Corps of Engineers uses their criteria to select the houses. We are just along for the ride. They have to go through their very specific way of doing it, which is different than FEMA and different than we would, but they're bringing money and their analysis shows that these are at high risk to flood again, so they're able to pay 65% of the cost.
Yes.
So similar questions. Where does our 35% of the funding come from? Is that out of?
It comes out of stormwater. We have it in our user fee. We have in our 5-year capital plan. We have money in there every year for this particular purpose.
And then the second question is, did the 2010 flood give us the opportunity to see where all the potential buyout properties are, or do we continue to discover new properties that get added to this
We
list?
continue to go. We pretty much know where the friends of low places are. We know where those are.
Yeah.
2010 made that very obvious, but we still, all storms are not created equal. And we've had some floods worse than 2010 after 2010. It just depends on if you get a downpour. So we have a list that's sort of a moving list, and we look at opportunities where they come and when they come, and so it's changing all the time.
And is that list, is it getting shorter or not?
I could keep buying as long as we got money coming. I mean, we're trying to get the ones that are the closest to the creek and the most at risk. But as you expand out, the list is never going to go away.
Okay, thank you.
But Councilor, I would say, and Tom, correct me, this did give us an opportunity to sit down with the Corps and actually go to Washington and present, from the 2010 flood, the things that happened as our overall plan for the county. And the whole buyout program is the most efficient way of eliminating flood-prone areas.
Gotcha.
So I guess my question, Mr. Palco, was just to build on Council Lady Allen and Council Lady Johnson, kind of the federal local balance in that regard. So like Saunders, because that maybe doesn't necessarily meet or isn't on the radar screen of the Corps program. Can you just speak to kind of that balance overall? And I mean, I know there's a larger maybe strategic plan, and another time we can talk about the whole picture, but.
With Saunders, we actually had a project identified to improve the drainage in that area. And then these houses flooded twice in February, and we're like, well, let's just rethink that, because we could get the water to the houses and past the houses a little more efficiently, but then there's a bottleneck at the railroad track behind.
Okay.
So again, we just shifted the money within that project essentially, and said instead of doing what we were gonna do, let's just take the opportunity to take the houses down because they recently flooded. And so we do that in our capital program. We've started buying some houses through our stormwater capital program where, again, I can't get the water to go magically through the houses, so we're taking some of those out.
So I appreciate that. I want us to be just as a body conscious because of that fee. And I think we've all noticed those, those sea-level projects moving up and more getting done. That's kind of happening in the public right away, but that we're just finding that right balance so that you all have the flexibility in capital money to address something like this, but then what are the federal implications? Just looking at it holistically.
Yeah,
I'd appreciate
we would
that.
always love to buy houses with someone else's money.
Right.
But again, in this particular case, the ones on Saunders,
Right. Understand.
all
yeah.
three property owners are saying, please help us out.
Right.
And the renters are saying, this was not a safe place to live. So we leave our flexibility in our program where we've got active projects through the Corps and through FEMA, but then also we reserve money under our budget to take them out.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Other questions on flood buyout? Let's see, we've got a new member who is joining. All right, in which case we centered most of that discussion on RS 2019-1802. We've got a motion properly seconded. Seeing no interest in further discussion, I would say all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. RS 2019-1803 approves an agreement between the United States Department of the Army and the Department of Water and Sewerage Services to provide relocation assistance for the 7 Mile Creek Flood Risk Management Project in Davidson County. See above. I would accept a motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? All right, seeing none. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Very good. RS 2019-1804 authorizes the Director of Public Property or designee to exercise option agreements for the purchase of various flood-prone properties for Metro Water Services. We've got a letter to approve. I would accept a motion to approve. A motion second, and Council
Yeah, these are
Member
the,
Henry,
these are the properties, the aforementioned properties on Saunders. I did want to let you know that it was brought to my attention by the neighbors. And like you said, it's flooding. The tenants move out, they fix it up, it floods again, the tenants move out. It was a habitual problem. The neighborhood is surrounded by homeowners that were very concerned about the tenants and helped those families immediately, particularly in February. And by the 1st of March, all of them had found new homes, affordable homes at the same rate and in the same area, so they were able to continue being part of the community, which I wanted to give a shout out to the folks on Saunders Avenue for taking care of their family. Nashville did that in big time in 2010, as we all remember, but sometimes it happens block by block, and I wanted to acknowledge that and appreciate the Herculean efforts to find a way to where the property owners are properly compensated and can reinvest in additional affordable housing because of this buyout, and that the homeowners in the neighborhood are safer because of it. So thank you for your time to be able to say that.
Very good. Thank you, Councilman. Any discussion based on that input? All right, seeing none. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? There you go, Councilman. All right, RS 2019-1805 accepts easements for public rights of way in connection with the development of the River North project. We've got a letter to approve. Accept a motion.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Discussion. There was some in Budget and Finance, I believe.
There was, and so I had moved for a deferral of one meeting in Budget and Finance, just because of kind of the broader implications and trying to understand what's in this $20 million capital spending bucket that we all approved back in October. And so I recognize this is an acceptance of easements, but as I said, in Budget and Finance, but with a little more implication for the public works space, I just think it's incumbent upon us as a committee to understand kind of this first step in the process. And so what we have already likely, I assume the administration has committed to build. I had concerns, colleagues, at the time when we approved that $20 million bucket that we had no sort of itemization of what that was going to include beyond, I think we understood maybe the intersection at Cowan and some internal road network. But I had just asked that before, horses out of the barn, ball is rolling, I think this is going to be a great project. I just wanted to understand what these first easements were for, but also had asked the administration at Budget and Finance to please report to us on everything that 20 million is going to apply to. I would imagine that might take them a little bit of time, but this is the, I guess, third major participation agreement this committee has seen. We've talked about Century Farms and how that was kind of an ideal partnership. There was some consternation over Nashville Yards and that participation agreement, but we're seeing more and more of these, and these are really significant incentive packages, and I've become concerned sometimes that there's a disparity across the county as to what we require certain developers and builders to do, and what other developers and builders are required to do, potentially just because they're kind of afforded access to the table to negotiate for themselves. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to just have a little more scrutiny on this, and so that was why I had asked for more information. So with that, can somebody just speak to these easements specifically, or?
Devin Doyle, Public Works. So the easements that are called out in this agreement are for the dedication of right-of-way for the future construction of the internal road network that will serve and support the entire River North development. So I believe these easements are being coordinated with the Top Golf properties, and so those property owners have come forward and have made the commitment through this agreement to dedicate the appropriate right-of-ways that contribute toward the eventual construction of the internal road network.
So does that imply then that there are kind of schematic drawings that show what this is envisioned to look like?
Correct.
And is that information that could be shared with us?
It is. Now, I don't have it with me today, but we do. Public Works has that information. I believe the Water Department, they've actually preliminarily submitted road construction plans for grading and such. So those plans are available. They're in a preliminary format, but
Right.
they are available.
Along with a preliminary estimate that says we think we're going to have roads that are this wide and this long,
Correct.
and that's how we
Yes.
came up with this. Is that
Yes.
information that has been shared with us or could be shared with us?
It can be. I'm
that's what we're
not
asking for.
sure that it's right. Okay. I'm
You know,
not
you
sure
can
that's
put
been
draft all
requested.
over it and preliminary and
Right.
don't
Most
focus on
definitely,
this.
Councilman.
Right.
Yes.
But I think that's what we're,
Yeah, that's why I was hoping that we could defer one meeting. That way we can give a whole look to this and just understand the broader implications of this. I'm obviously not opposed to it. I just think that we should not kind of get the ball rolling on something like this when we have not, as a committee or a council body, determined what is the appropriate level of participation, how those deals are structured, and is that fair and equitable across all the major developments that we're encountering. So I'm not sure what's in order,
Well, I guess
Chair.
my take on this is that while I understand that general concern as an acceptance of easements, this is not structuring the participation agreement. I think we've still got plenty of time to consider that. If you want to make a competing motion, that is fine. I will tell you, unless it was already deferred to Budget and Finance, I'm not particularly eager to see this committee defer it.
I appreciate that. I think I will just go ahead and make that competing motion on principle, because I think what continually happens to our body is, while this in and of itself is not something that anybody thinks needs to stop, it's just one piece in the bigger thing, and we advance one small piece, and then when we get to the next piece and we have any concerns, then we say, oh, well, we can't not do this now because we already did that. And so I think best practice would be that the administration would have come to us, whether in the context of the participation agreement or when we voted to put this in the capital spending plan, so that we would know how many internal roadways are there and what's the bridge and what's the intersection and what are the broader implications. I've become concerned because, if we put $20 million in the capital spending plan for River North, probably the administration at that time already knew what all this stuff was going to be, but they could not give us that information. That was in October. And here we are, and so, should the bucket actually be $16 million bucket? Should it be a $21 million bucket? We don't know, and I just think this is the first piece, and so just,
To that end, am I appropriate in allowing?
Point of order, Mr. Chair, before the motion is voted on, may I
That's the
speak?
chair. Chair said.
I apologize. Mr. Chair?
Yes, point of order.
Yeah. Before the motion is voted, may I speak? I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just want to make sure I'm able to speak.
That's fine. I want to make sure that we can get the motion considered. Mr. Jameson, is a competing motion appropriately considered at this juncture?
Was it a deferral motion?
Yes.
One
A
meeting.
deferral motion takes precedence.
Okay, that's what I thought. All right, so we've got a motion to defer one meeting. I'm waiting on a second.
Second.
All right, we've got a second. Councilmember Davis.
I understand what my colleague is talking about. Number one, these plans have been in the works for a while, and I believe that, looking at some documents, this information is available, and I know a lot of this is just draft, but we don't need to slow this down anymore. And all we're doing right now is just finding more reasons why to defer things. That's why I feel. And I could be wrong. I'm fine with being wrong. You could disagree with me. But once again, this wasn't talked about in budget and finance, okay? So I'm asking this committee, please, I'm not for the deferral. This is my area. The intersection does more than just helps River North. It helps the traffic flow going across the Spring Street Bridge into Jefferson Street. It helps the intersections off the highway. Yes, River North benefits this, but Top Golf and all those other places have already given away permission for right-of-ways. So this is more than just River North. This is a big intersection, big highway access off of Dickerson, Spring Street, and going into the Chairs community in Germantown. So I'm just asking you, please move this forward. And I believe some of the stuff is available right now for us to look at.
I guess I would ask you, Councilman Davis.
Hang on one
yeah.
second. I'm going to jump in here and say also, as the neighboring council member, the sword cuts both ways, I think, in response to your general argument. I think council doesn't do the general public any greater favors when it uses tools to slow things down that are not apropos to the actual concern. I will say for my part personally, an acceptance of easements for River North does not cause undue concern, and I think it's most appropriate for this committee to allow this to proceed without a deferral. Councilmember Henderson.
Well, I appreciate your opinion on that, and I think my concern just comes, again, not in the easements particularly, but this committee has not seen what all the public infrastructure implications are going to be. We have not been presented any plans. We don't have any understanding. We found out about this development, in the newspaper yesterday. So, I feel that it's apropos of that work. It's not an intent to slow it down. It's just that we don't have the participation agreement before us yet. And so again, from an order of operation standpoint, process matters. So these easements shouldn't be coming before the participation agreement for the work that will involve these easements. That's just, it's not an appropriate process order in my view. So it's not an attempt to slow down, it's an attempt to align. Okay, so what I would just say is that if supposedly the participation agreement is going to be before us at next meeting, why would we not then defer the easements one meeting so that the participation agreement for the public infrastructure that aligns with the easements is happening at the same meeting, next meeting, when we'll have the plans and we can talk about it.
I mean, I guess I might ask Public Works to speak to that.
I guess I'm trying to understand exactly what your question is, Council Lady.
I think the Vice Chair is asking why these aren't in sync effectively in terms of procedure. Why would Public Works prefer to
Like, what's the
accept
hurry?
easements prior to the consideration of the participation?
So, and I'm gonna have to apologize. I'm not sure what participation agreement is coming on the next agenda. What
I
is-
think the entire River North participation agreement.
Is not, when's it coming, Mr. Weaver?
Mr. Chair, can I speak?
You may.
Hi, James Weaver Waller. I represent River North. Correct one thing. The River North has been voted on 5 different times by various council members over the last 19 years. If you just learned about it yesterday in the newspaper, that's...
Mr. Weaver, I didn't learn about it yesterday in the newspaper.
But I'm
You put in capital spending plan, we know.
I'm just responding to what you said, ma'am. So the first participation agreement came through in 2018, early 18. That was for design dollars associated with the intersection of Jefferson and Cowan, Cherokee Boulevard, River North Boulevard, and a pedestrian bridge. And those design dollars, council approved that, 30-ish votes. That work has been ongoing, including design work associated with these roads. We came back in 2018, and the council appropriated $20 million for the construction of Cowan Street, Jefferson Street interchange, a revised, improved interchange.
And
The
just
increase-
so we're clear, what the council approved was $20 million for River North with no particular projects specified.
No, ma'am, that's not the case.
Yeah, it is. It was an October capital spending plan with a $20 million bucket with no any indication as to what it was. So what you're speaking to, the previous participation agreement, you said was in 2018. I don't recall that agreement. So I recall the capital spending plan. So what previous participation agreement are you referring to?
There was a participation agreement associated with a previous capital spending plan that appropriated $5 million for the design work for all this infrastructure.
In what year?
So the email that I sent you this afternoon,
I haven't received that yet, but thank you.
well, it's in there. The dates are in there. I can't remember the dates. First time we were in front of council was 2015. We're back in front of council in 2016. We were in front of council in 2017, 2018, and here we are again in 2019. So this project's been in front of council numerous times. One participation agreement's already been approved by the council associated with the design.
This term?
This term,
On what day? Is that in the email?
it is.
Okay. This, colleagues, is just why I'm saying we should defer at one meeting so that we can address this stuff, and we don't have to address it now.
This particular, what's in front of you tonight are the acceptance of easements. The new participation agreement for the money that was appropriated in October will come before council when the bids are received, so that you have a real number in front of you and the actual plans that are going to be constructed in front of you, and that'll be when the bids are received. Tonight's thing is a really kind of just a routine thing where Topgolf has dedicated some easements to the city for future road expansions in this area that council's already funded. The only thing we haven't done is voted on the participation agreement for it. Public Works can build it tomorrow without a participation agreement because the money's already been appropriated. So this is, again, as I said to you last night, and I said in my email today, transparency, this is the most transparent project I've worked on in 30 years. We've been up here almost a half dozen times getting things voted on 3 readings at a time. So we're happy to provide additional information. There will be an enormous amount of information associated with the next participation agreement when it comes, because it'll have bid documents and design documents, and you'll know exactly what Public Works is going to do with the $20 million. That's just not what this is. This is just an easement.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So, I appreciate that, and I just think kind of here we are again, often where we have multiple disparate pieces, and I appreciate, I've not read your email, but perhaps that put it kind of in line comparatively. Did you share that with the whole committee or just to me?
The entire council.
Awesome, thank you, I appreciate that.
I would just like to articulate one thing. I have followed this development very closely because it backs up to my district, and I would actually be vehemently opposed to a deferral at this time, based on following the project from its inception.
I appreciate that.
All right, other discussion on deferral?
Just one more question.
Yes, Councilman.
I mean, in terms of getting information, I'm guessing if there are bids out, then there's at least an RFP or some document that has guidelines on what's there. Is that something we could get?
Well, the construction documents are not out to bid. So getting back to your original question, Council Lady Henderson, about the order, procedural order. So the Metro Planning Department and the Department of Public Works and Metro Water Services have been directly and consistently involved with the design team. That participation agreement for the funding for the actual engineering design of the infrastructure, the utility packages, has been well underway and has been proceeding. Through that process, the right-of-way identification, or right-of-way needs have been identified as part of that plan development. And so consequently, they are at a level of maturity where set-asides for easements and right-of-ways, to Councilman O'Connell's point, are deemed appropriate by our department. At this stage of the development process, the funding is in the capital spending plan, so the funding has been committed towards this infrastructure. To your point, I don't know to what level it has been qualified or clarified, but the plans have been developing along the lines.
So what I would suggest to the administration, to Mr. Weaver, to Councilman Davis, is that when we have a $20 million bucket in our capital spending plan, and somebody in this body asks a question of the administration about what is in that bucket, and the person in the administration says, I'm not really sure, it's the intersection at Cowan and some road stuff, throws it to Mr. Sturdivant, and Mr. Sturdivant says that he's not really sure, clearly the information was available. I had asked in advance the capital spending plan to understand all the public roadways, what was anticipated as part of that bucket, as part of due diligence. I was not given that information at any point along the way. I expressed a desire for it in advance of the October spending plan. I expressed a desire for that information at the capital spending plan hearing. And so now, here we are again, when I've raised a question, because this is the last, in the whole continuum, to your point, Mr. Weaver, of all the various parts, here's another trigger, right? Here's just another time when it's like, oh, what's going on with this, okay? So then that brings me back to, I'm not, until I receive your email, necessarily privy to every single step along the way of whatever. It's incumbent upon the administration to convey that to us when this body or this committee poses those questions back in October, right? So if we elevate that question again based on what's before us, and then we're told, oh, don't defer, don't ask any more questions because of all this other stuff that's happened previously, that, it's, I guess.
That's not what I'm saying.
Well, okay, that's what I'm hearing. So I guess.
That's good to understand.
Okay, so I will withdraw the motion to defer on these easements, but I do want to express to the administration, is there anybody here from the administration?
No, wait, I'll start running.
So I believe, okay, yeah, I'm sure you'll confer, because after I posed my questions to the new gentleman who does ECD, right?
I understand that.
He came back and spoke to you, and I'm sure you all have conferred about the information that you're going to get to us. Hey, Joseph, I'll just share with Mr. Weaver what we're hoping to see before we have anything else before this committee related to River North, please. Okay? So I expressed that in the context of the budget and finance hearing. You have shared some stuff via email, so we can just get all that together, talk about the kind of the order of operations. That's what I would appreciate, because I just think that's good process, and we should be doing that for any and every major development like this, where we are partnering with a developer so that there's a level playing field and that everybody knows how this process works. So, thank you.
That's good.
All right, so I am understanding you have withdrawn your
I have.
motion for one meeting. That brings us back to the motion to approve. Is there any other discussion? Councilmember Hurt seeking
Well,
recognition.
I'm not a member of this committee, but I can appreciate what Councilwoman Henderson is saying, because in my day job, I have been, for 20 years, working for the Jefferson Street business community, and this project, I've not been included. And it seems to me that there have been too many projects that take place. You know, they say if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I think that if we're going to be an equitable city, if we're going to be inclusive of things such as this, then we've got to be at the table from the very beginning. And I'm not sure if anyone from the Jefferson Street community has been a part of any communications or discussions that have obviously taken place.
Councilmember Hurt, we have a number of items still before this committee. Can you bring those concerns to the floor?
Oh, absolutely. I just wanted to put it out there, you know, not to do anything or just be heard.
Councilmember.
Thank you.
Councilmember Bednack.
So we don't have an equity committee, so I couldn't bring it at equity committee, but I think there is and totally unrelated. I mean, I don't have any problem with this easement. Let me just be clear about that. I do have a problem with the impact that this may have on small businesses that are existing on that part of the city. So I don't know where will be the right place to bring that up, probably at the floor of the council. But I'd like to see the Economic Development Office of the council to step up and help us figure out what are we going to do to deal with the unintended consequences, the gentrification to small businesses.
Councilmember Davis.
Speaking of Will Radford's firm and partners, they own the corner piece, and they've been involved with this process. Well, also with the repairs with the intersection and requesting, along with the repairs for Dickerson and some of the stuff included. You know, we've had people involved, you know, and if Jen was involved, I apologize, Council Lady. But mainly thing right now is, you know, we've been going through, we voted on this over 5 times. In this body, we voted on this twice. We submitted the overlay to design this area. I forget the date off the top of my head, but it was for this body in this council term. And so there has been participation with people on both sides of the intersection, and also participation, of course, with Public Works and the easements that have been given by Topgolf, and also participation with Cross Point Church and the other in Oldham Street, which is off of Cowan. And so I'm asking you to approve this committee. I'm fine with talking about it.
I have no problem with this.
And the EC and the Economic Development Office has been involved in those properties that are owned, especially by minorities like Donald Day and Will Radford that have that property in the River North community. Also with Jason Patel in their hotel right there too, with those participations. And the Knights Inn has also given access to right-of-way for this too. So there has been participation and protections for the community, which you've been speaking of, sir.
Thank you.
Elrod.
Call the question.
Got a call for the question. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the question has been called. We are back to the motion to approve. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Yes.
All right, we've got 1 opposed. Any abstentions? All right, motion is passed 9-1. That brings us to RS 2019-1808. Recognizes and commends the creation of the Committee for Identification and Preservation within Cane Ridge, as well as the many groups that work towards improving the District 31 community, including the Cane Ridge Community Club, Friends of Mill Creek Greenway, and Keep Southeast Nashville Healthy. I would accept a motion to approve.
Second.
Got a second? Councilmember Bednack, would you like to speak to this one?
Well, I'm very proud of the participation of the different groups in the district. They help fight to try to stop the gas compression station. They are supporting the Greenway. they started working on identifying some of the archaeological sites that we have in the district, like graveyards and other sites that sometimes get overrun by development. So I just wanted to, on my way out, recognize them and hoping that they will continue the great work they've been doing.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember. Any other comments on this one? Seeing none, I will say, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Congratulations, guys. All right, bills on second reading. We have got substitute bill, BL 2019-1643, requires all existing culverts, inlets, storm drains, and ditches within the T2 rural neighborhood policy and T3 suburban neighborhood policy to be upgraded, retrofitted, and/or constructed to current stormwater management manual standards by January 1, 2025. I do not see Councilmember Hall, and I do not have a letter. We'll move that to the heel. Somebody
It's deferred by rule
It was deferred by
in
rule?
budget.
Okay. We might wind up in that spot anyway. We'll move on to BL 2019-1658, amends the Metro Code of Laws regarding shared urban mobility devices. There is a substitute. Councilmember Elrod, do we need to take action on the substitute? Yes. All right. Do you want to move that now?
Move the first substitute.
All right. We've got the first substitute has been moved. Can I get a second on that?
Second.
All right. We've got a motion and a second on the first substitute. Councilmember Elrod, would you like to describe that?
Yes, the first substitute, the first of two, is sponsored by myself. It would put in, upon passing of third reading, it would remove all SUMD scooters from the streets for 60 days in anticipation, and require the TLC to come up with an RFP process for up to 3 companies, and then it also directs and allows the TLC to establish any number of other regulations or fees or that kind of thing to further administer the program, so they don't have to necessarily come back to council to put them back on the streets. So that's what the substitute does.
All right. Discussion on the first substitute. All right. I don't see it. Yeah, sorry.
I have an amendment that we're offering tonight, Chair. I don't know when you want to take that, or if that is, when is that?
Am I correct, there's a second substitute as well. Is that different from your amendment?
It's the same thing. Yeah, it is a second substitute, sorry.
I think, and I will look to Mr. Jameson, we should probably vote on the substitutes in sequence. Is that correct? Because they would be in conflict, correct?
You can, and just for what I anticipate the vice mayor doing is that in the same way that he takes budget substitutes and wants them all heard, so that one is not passed to the exclusion of all others, I anticipate he will ask Councilman Elrod, introduce the substitute, allow discussion of the second substitute, then come back, and then you'll have to vote on one or the other to the exclusion of the other.
So in order to do that, right, I mean, basically my sense would be, do we need to move the second substitute here to ensure proper hearing?
Yeah, the committee can hear both, can approve both. A single council member can vote for both without being contradictory because this is on second.
Okay. Then in which case, I would accept a motion on the second substitute.
So moved. Second.
And got a second there. Councilmember Davis, would you like to describe that one?
Sure. Yeah, so basically you're going to put them both out there. Just
put them both out there and we'll take a vote on each.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, you've probably heard of stuff floating around out there. Obviously, the ban or no ban was the choice before. What we've tried to do here is just sort of set up a third way, just to kind of, generate discussion among our members and just see if there's an appetite or an opportunity to have a compromise and do this sort of third way. Just running through kind of what it does, and a lot of the companies are here if you guys want to ask questions, that sort of thing. They're going to immediately reduce the fleet size by half, if you hadn't heard that out there on the streets. Immediately cut it by half. I know Lime and Bird already have, just as a sign of good faith, cut their fleet by half. So this would cut everyone by half from 4,000 to 2,000 scooters on the road in Nashville. Mandated slow zones in the high traffic areas, so basically like lower Broadway area, make them slow zone areas. It would cut the hours of operation, limit the hours of operation, shutting them down at 10 p.m. on weekdays and 11 on weekends. More people on the ground. Of course, a lot of the complaints you're hearing is they're on the sidewalks, they're in the right-of-way. So having a couple of employees per 100 scooters that are on the road is what they've come up with here. mandate more helmet promotional activities, get more, you hear a lot about the riders not having helmets, a lot of PR, a lot of helmet activities out there, more signage so that we're trying to help with the riding on the sidewalk. I know it's hard to influence user behavior. This is a disruptor. We've got a lot of bad user behavior out there. So some $10,000 per company for riding on the sidewalk signage. And then require a 120-minute response time for all complaints. And then also the establishment of an ADA complaint hotline was another suggestion for the substitute. So happy to discuss, let you guys discuss, but I mean, basically it's a compromise from just an outright ban to some kind of a, obviously a shrinkage of all the scooters on the road and then all these safety measures. A compromise because there's a lot of Nashvilleians who like riding these, and I think everybody, realizes that the rollout wasn't exactly what we wanted in Nashville. It hasn't gone exactly as we wanted, but rather than throw the baby out with the bathwater, is there a way to bridge the gap to this RFP period? As the mayor put in his letter, there is going to be an RFP process. Is there a way to bridge the gap without just shutting everybody down? So this is an option for something for you guys to be able to vote on. If you don't want ban or no ban, it's a third way.
All right, you guys. Thank you, Councilmember Davis. Just to try to briefly summarize here, we have got 2 substitutes, and so committee members know each of these will effectively end the existing pilot that was created under BL 2018-1202. The first substitute would clear scooters from the street effectively, or cease permits. I mean, I guess it remains to be seen. There are probably some questions about revocation of permits. And then allow for an RFP to take hold within a period of time. The second substitute basically shrinks the existing fleet sizes, or seeks to, while that RFP is conducted. I saw Councilmember Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And both substitutes are headed to the floor. I'm taking it as pundit. So this gives us an opportunity for a discussion. Councilman Davis, in your substitute in point C2, commitment to ensuring rider compliance with state and local laws, if you or somebody from the industry, I guess, would comment on whether current laws were simply not enforced in the last era, so to speak, which I guess will be coming to an end, or is something more required by state and local laws? I mean, just did we try to enforce the laws that were there and did not? Is this one of the problems, or is there something else required?
I'll quickly say, yeah, I think we definitely have had enforcement issues and resource issues and that sort of thing, but I'll let the companies comment. I don't know if Sam or somebody wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, sure. To date, we're not aware of...
If you could identify yourself.
Sure, excuse me. Yeah, I'm Sam Reed. I'm with Bird. Like I said, we're not aware to date of enforcement activities that have happened on the city side of things. There are others in the room that may know more about that. I'm not aware of any. We're doing some on our own right now that is more about re-education through community mode on our app by warning bad riders and bad parkers, that warns them but does not carry any punitive fine with it right now. That may be something that, as we go through an RFP, reduce providers, that may be something that the city might look for in an RFP.
And Councilmember Cooper, you might have seen there have been 0 civil penalties, citations issued related to the pilot program.
Okay, I think that's just for the public record. Mr. Chairman, I'm grateful for that, and the industry would agree with that. That's through the chairman. That there's just
that's a factual
thing. There was a failure to regulate with the existing law has led to some of the trouble that we have today.
Certainly, if there was some sort of punitive measure put in place for, on the city side, bad parking, bad riding, it would certainly make it easier for us when we are reminding our riders through education on the app, talking to them on the streets, written on the equipment, signage, all those things. We still, obviously, the punitive measure would provide some additional incentive for folks, but yeah, we haven't seen that.
The representative from left would like to seek recognition.
Thank you, Chair. Max Lucen from Lyft. I would just like to say the RFP has mentioned this, that additional resources go towards enforcement, and I think not just Lyft, but I don't want to speak on behalf of the entire industry, but I think we're all supportive of that because we see it as an important piece to the puzzle here.
Yes.
Todd Overwell from Lyman, and I can add, aligning myself with my colleagues from the other SUMD operators, we have also all, I think, broadly acknowledged in the letter that we submitted to the city, outlining steps that we were prepared to take, that we understand that there may be more resources required of us to meet the obligations that would be on the city for any additional enforcement activities. So I think that's all contemplated with our public position.
Mr. Chairman, Jamie Hall on behalf of Uber and Jump, and I don't want to say there's been absolutely no enforcement or regulation, because when Mr. Fields sends the operating managers emails that there's attention need to be done to something, that happens on a very frequent basis. I won't speak for him, obviously, but we respond to those, every single day, all day. Or a council member posting a picture on Twitter, that gets people moving too. So it's not the absence of regulation.
I appreciate that. I think my response to that would be, I have personally submitted dozens of reports to Hub Nashville specifically about ADA non-compliant parking on sidewalks. It has not changed rider behavior. It has been across all operators. And so I appreciate that there has been some regulatory presence, but that mechanism does not come with a penalty. It does not seem to provide any meaningful disincentive to the behavior. And so I think we're back to Councilmember Cooper's question. Did you want to follow up after hearing from the industry?
Well, I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. The question is, just did we do a poor job of regulating, right? And that's led to part of the problem, that there were regulations that if we had enforced under the old regime, that would have been a more successful experience for the city, for the riders, and for the companies. And that's I'm grateful, to have the industry respond to that.
Well, I think one, and I will let Councilmember Elrod, who kind of led the policy framework, I think one thing is we have learned quite a bit about how we can record the best ideas we think we can come up with on paper in the Metro Code of Laws if we do not wind up, to your point, with effective administrative, departmental support for what is in the Metro Code of Laws. The best conceived pilot is still capable of failure. My sense is that in both of these substitutes, the anticipated RFP would be far more like a contract. It would be a contractual obligation to some extent, where trigger mechanisms would be more easily enforced by the city than we as a body can possibly enforce through the Metro Code of Laws when we're not getting the necessary departmental support. Councilmember Elrod.
I would agree. One of the biggest I think hangups we've had with this is lack of enforcement, but I think it's mostly due to a lack of resources. Where we've given this to Mr. Fields and the TLC, and I think we all thought there may be 2 or 3 companies come, and there's 7. We need to. It was a framework that we put in place in August, and then, government time, we're moving pretty fast and totally revamping it. But on the street level, it's been, a significant, people are mad, and understandably so. So I think we revamp it into an RFP, and we're able to basically allow and require, really, the companies to pay for their own enforcement, to raise the money from the companies, and then that way we're able to hire the staff, start putting more infrastructure in, so that we can make this work better and give the program the resources that we haven't yet. Because how much time do you believe that you spend on this?
My time is between 60 and 70%. And frankly,
this is already when you're on top of you're already busy.
But frankly, there's 2 ways to deal with regulation. You can deal with it reactively or proactively. Metro government typically is a reactive government, not because we don't want to be proactive. It is a matter of resources. If we go to the codes department, I've spent a little time there. I understand their enforcement levels and their needs. I know the police needs. And in our particular case, when we get a complaint, we relay it to the company. The company is typically within 2 hours. They're out there moving what the law requires them to move. Now, is that 100%? No, because we can't go look at every complaint complaint that's come through. But what we try to do is pick out enough of them to make sure that we're finding compliance.
Can you just remind everyone how many people work in your office?
We have 6 people. I have 4 people in the office. I'm sorry. We have 4 people in the office, counting me, and 2 inspectors.
And if I may, one final quick follow-up question, both to Councilman Arrowrod and Mr. Fields. What's your confidence level that we have the ability to write an RFP that becomes an effective enforcement contract?
I think we have a high level of being able to review. First of all, we've got some frameworks around the country. A year ago, there was nothing. I mean, around the country, we were, Councilman Elrod, we could argue about a lot of things, but there were not a lot of models to look at. We do have some models, and we have some other cities to work with to learn what they've done, but we've also learned a great deal ourselves. We do know that if we can put some people on the street that are focused on it, now how we get there, that's part of the trick. Are they police officers that we specifically fund for this, or do we have a hybrid, some sort of a police officer, some sort of a community officer they can deal with? So the tricky part is listening, figuring out what makes sense. But we're seeing good results. For instance, on the corrals, we're seeing that is now working. Is it 100%? No, but it's working. So I could argue all the bills here. You want me to argue this side, I can do this, or I could argue the other. But the truth of the matter is we have learned a great deal, and there's more to learn.
Mr. Fields, better for worse or worse for your office if we require these devices to be horse-drawn?
Or what if they pull the carriages instead of the horses?
He may have left me speechless.
Thank you. I've had lots of conversations with the operators, and I know they have continued to look for innovative ways to solve this. But to me, the parking part, we're starting to get a grip on. The stupid riding part, we haven't made any headway on, and that's because it's just hard for someone to chase down somebody that's
Let me
riding.
show you some parking pictures from Salem Town.
Yeah, well, so I have to say we've solved it, but we're making more progress there than we're making on the riding piece. I mean, I saw a guy on one foot, weaving down Fairfax Avenue and having a great time, and that's typical of what the problem is. And so I guess my concern is just making sure that the difference between what we have now and what we have spelled out in this RFP is a mechanism for someone to have the wherewithal to chase people down or to do it electronically. I mean, I know one company has that, and I think that if we don't have that in place, we haven't gained anything. So I would suggest maybe one representative from Public Works works with the TLC in the development of the RFP.
I think so. Councilmember Henderson?
If I could, just to build on what she's saying, and then, so my concern comes in, I support the middle path, the second substitute, and so that's what I'll be voting in favor of. But I do become concerned, and I think this body has seen often, because the power of the RFP rests in the mayor's office, there's a disconnect from a legislative standpoint, right, when we're trying to legislate for these new and emerging disruptors. And so, the RFP gets baked without us involved, and thus there's always just this disconnect. So I would suggest, and I don't know if that's, I don't want to complicate things as far as the process tonight, because there's already a lot for people to keep up with, but I do think, whether for this bill or going forward, but to Council Lady Allen's point, somebody from this Public Works Committee, like Councilman Elrod, or somebody who's very well-versed in this, needs to be a part of that RFP process, so that we can make sure, begin as we intend to go, front end, back end, what's the legislation going to look like, how does that align with the RFP? Again, process matters, because it just, I just think we have to be kind of thinking through all that.
I don't believe either of these substitutes is drafted in such a way that says a member of the Public Works Committee shall, right? I don't know that we're looking to amend it, but I think to your point, we can certainly recommend that be the case. Councilmember Johnson?
Yes, I would like to ask a question to Mike. When we original scooter bill was drafted, I think it was July 1st date, which was for us to get the data from TLC regarding, all the scooters, SUVs, some D. But I think we have not received any data. And also the pilot had some sunset data. If, council does not act such a date, this will be reactivated by council body resolution to extend. So it's like a sunset provision. Can you remind me of the date?
So that was April 1st, the renewal by resolution. With respect to the data, Director Fields has just submitted and is in your inbox, re-forwarded from me, the report that's required by, I think it's 62-100. And it has the 3 items that were required in that section were the impact, whether or not the current fees were sufficient to continue administration and enforcement, and any recommendations for changes to the ordinance. And that is in your inbox late this morning.
Okay. Unfortunately, I have not had a chance to get to it. So, in relate to that, why are we, are we doing, considering, is it even spirit of our original intent, or, are we legally obligated, or are we legally, opposing to go against the original bill intent of the bill?
So generally, if you're issuing a permit, granting the right to do something, the council is loath to rescind that permit because you can create liabilities because it creates a property right. Generally speaking, however, for a pilot program for which there was no permanent right anticipated, and if there is a public safety, the council, the administration has the police power to step in and essentially say, on second thought, we're going to do X, Y, Z. But whether or not that's within the spirit of the original ordinance, which clearly had the pilot going through April 1st, I would have to defer to you.
April 1st of what year?
Next year.
2020.
And I'll just speak to the legislative intent, since I was the legislative sponsor. And I spoke publicly, I think that at any point this is something that we could pull the plug on. Said it when in August when we put in the first big set of rules and the tweaks this winter, and there's even language in there that all operators are basically on notice they have to comply with anything that we legally pass as a body. So for me, that's, the legislative intent was the pilot project would automatically end in April unless we ended it sooner, and they're on notice that, publicly and legally, these could get pulled at any time.
Councilmember Haywood, did I see you? Councilmember Bednar.
Who's from Public Works here that works on bike lanes?
Yeah, Jeff's not here tonight.
How long will it take to paint the bike lanes that we need to keep?
I'm not the right person to probably answer this question.
Councilmember, I think I and our vice chair would say there would be a frustrated response to.
But I think it's an important question because we are being asked.
It's an important question. It has a bad answer.
Right, and I think that's what I'm asking. So there are 2 conditions for the Second Amendment to work. One is that we need to have dedicated bike lanes for people to be able to ride them, because you can say that you're going to find somebody for riding on the sidewalk, but if they don't have a bike lane to ride, what are they going to do? Float? I mean, it just doesn't work.
Ask a cyclist right now today, Councilmember.
That's right. And so the other thing is enforcement. How many people do you need to enforce this Second Amendment?
That's part of what the RFP would actually do is develop, that would be.
No, but the Second Amendment, not the gun one.
The second
It's the second substitute.
The second substitute.
The Second Amendment.
I am speculating that it would take as few as 2 and as many as 4, focusing mostly on downtown.
Okay.
But we have neighborhood issues that we would need to address as well.
So how long will it take to get those 4 guys working if we pass this amendment?
It depends how quickly you fund it.
And that's
How long does it take to get our parking done?
Well, and that's why I think the reason you put in an RFP is they can basically require in the RFP, hey, whatever costs we have, you're going to immediately have to
Yeah,
pay
but
us
that
back
will
for it.
happen when the RFP passes. But what happens between now and the RFP? How we make sure that for the next month or so until the RFP happens, that people are going to actually be able to do it safely? So that's the question. I think we all pass laws all the time here, but we are not paying attention. And I don't mean this, I don't want to be disrespectful to the rest of the body, but we need money to make these things happen. And if we don't have money, we can't do miracles. We can't ask the staff to, she won't get on the street and start painting bike lanes.
I mean, it could happen.
Chair, if I may, to Councilman Bedney's point, I think, with kind of the middle path, second substitute, that's pulling effectively half of them off the street. So kind of the enforcement impact or the implications when you then have half of what you've had before, I think that improves the ability in that space. And then something that this committee has said many times before, whether for the RFP or in the intervening months, I think we need to look at as far as like the downtown CBID, right? And they have extra staff, rolling around on segways, sweeping up trash and whatever. Like typically in a core business district like that, some of this enforcement and community information kind of stuff, I said in this committee previously, could we do a downtown kind of concerted education effort with the downtown precinct, the CBID or something like that, whether it's around the corrals or how you shouldn't ride on sidewalks or whatever. Like, can we just potentially work with them, whether that's formalized in the RFP or just...
You would probably need a separate MOU or, yes, to codify that. Neither of these substitutes will require that.
Right. So I guess I appreciate the second substitute, but I do think we need to make sure, whether through the RFP or other MOUs, that we're getting things aligned, and hopefully the intervening time when there's less of them affords us an opportunity to do that.
Mr. Jameson, can I ask, for either of these, for the first or the second, how does the first, and this might be a question for Mr. Cooper, how does the first propose to either do permit revocation or otherwise eliminate fleets? How does the second propose to have the fleet size?
Well, the first one would say the permitting system is now off the table. You're just not going to have them until reissued following an RFP for 1 to 3 companies. The second one would maintain those that are in existence, but with a fleet reduction of 50%, so there'd be no...
But we have the legal ability to do either of those.
Yeah, so that's why you'll see in the recitals to the LROD substitute, the recitals that note the city's interest in maintaining the public safety, control of commerce, control of use of public right-of-ways. That gives the city authority to step in, despite the fact that it's created a permit rubric, to step in and either suspend permits, terminate permit programs.
All right.
Just a final thought here. We're really just talking about the bridge to the RFP process. I don't even know if the RFP is going to fix everything, but I think we'll be in a lot better shape with that process. The companies will be very accountable to the government, I think, in a different way than it is now. So we're just talking about how to get there. This second substitute also holds that date on us that, hey, in 90 days we're gonna hold that date to that process. Not just ban them and you could ban them and, well, maybe we'll do the RFP, maybe not, maybe they're just kind of gone forever. So I think if we're talking about, even the mayor put this RFP thing out there, I think the companies support that. Let's hold that honest. Maybe rather than just an outright pulling the rug out from under them, let them self-enforce a little more. The 2 people per 100 down there, moving them into the corrals, that's going to make a big difference too. The cutting in half and the 2 people per 100 scooters, to me, are going to make the most difference. They're going to push them in. Now, that doesn't stop the drunk guy that's acting crazy on the scooter. Yeah, and maybe, I'd love to see if they could self-enforce.
I would like that to be part of the 2 people per hundreds.
Yeah, we can tell them that's part of your job. I don't know if y'all can do that, but that's beyond my pay grade here. But yeah, that's a great idea. Like those 2 per 100, we need the companies self-enforcing. I think that's going to be inevitable in the RFP. So can we have them more self-enforcing here in this interim period is also part of it.
So Councilmember Davis, is the district council member who's probably most impacted by this in his district. We've needed that for a year, and we haven't gotten it.
I agree.
Yeah.
Nice listening from Lift. I would just urge on the second substitute, which we support. I would urge the council to set a hard cap for the fleet size, for example, 2,000, and then distribute that evenly among the operators. Because right now it's not even. And that's all I would add.
Let me ask for a clarification from what you're proposing from the operator perspective. we get 10 more operators, everybody's cap goes down?
It's my understanding that it will cap the number of operators as well. Maybe I
The
misunderstood.
RFP is not defined. Does the
Oh, the RFP
substitute
would.
itself?
Up to 3.
Is it up to 3?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what's been floated at the RFP process, yeah, up to 3.
Well, I know it's been floated, but the RFP.
In the substitute, yeah, is that?
It is in the language.
Yeah.
Chair, one question to Mr. Field. As far as the TLC point of view, safety enforcement, I think everybody's concerned about safety, how we promote safety among riders, pedestrians, and drivers around them. In your opinion, if this body were to adopt substitute to reduce in half, will it make it job much smoother and really allow you to enforce existing regulation?
Clearly, fewer vehicles would mean fewer riders. So yes, from that standpoint, I think it's going to continue to be on the companies as we've worked with them. They have to continually find new ways to keep their riders educated. For instance, one of them has instituted it's not a DUI enforcement, but they have to spell things out instead of just simply hitting a yes. So it's just little things, but to reinforce, and we've talked about trying to find ways, the more you ride a scooter, the less statistically speaking, you have fewer wrecks. By the time you've ridden 8 times, you're not going to have as many wrecks as if you've ridden it twice. So when you're in that particular area, the more messages, and they know they're riders, so if their rider's only 3, may get more messages fed to them, say, hey, did you know you can't park here, you can't park, force them to go through a process. Now, is that good customer service? Probably didn't make them happy. But from an education standpoint, it's important, and that's where we've been pressing the companies to do those sort of things, if that makes sense to you.
Yes, sure does. One follow-up question is, in your data, do you have any differentiation, local rider versus tourist rider, like a ratio?
There are, and I've not looked at those numbers today, there are approximately, now I just lost those numbers. Industry, how many local riders y'all having per day average? It just fell out of my mind.
Billy did a
Right.
survey of all of the rides in Nashville. Those riders that had 5 or more rides over a stretch of time was 60,000 riders.
Oh, percentage-wise.
Of our overall total riders, I actually don't have that.
We look at Lyft. We looked at where people take the most rideshare rides. They call it the home market, and it's continually going up. It's almost at 75% right now.
That's fine, that still doesn't answer the question about how many of those are locals versus tourists.
Billy,
Well,
is
it's
the
hard
zip
to
code of
know.
origin part of the data that we receive?
We do not get identifying information from zip codes.
We get no information that identifies who the user, like where they're coming from. So we don't really have any way of
But what we are able to do, what we're beginning to do anyway, is actually begin locating where those rides starting so we can give you general ideas. For instance, if we're having
I understand that.
I
That's
don't
not
have
answering
the
the fundamental
No, I
question.
can't answer.
Was that in, I apologize, Chair, was that in the Vanderbilt report?
Vanderbilt had some good stuff.
Or was it just, I guess that was just a number rather than percentage. I think you said overall rides. I just don't know if somebody didn't extrapolate that number of overall rides and how many were anticipated to be local because there was just a certain number of rides of the same user, assumption being they live
That's
here
right.
because it wasn't just a one-time, I'm down on Broadway, I'm gonna try this.
That's what we can draw from the data. Now, we did do a rider survey over the last 2 weeks. It showed roughly 50% of the folks using them were using them to get to and from work. That, take this number for what it's worth. This was about 120 respondents. It was 86% of our respondents identified themselves as living in and around the Nashville area. That's a high number. I mean, obviously, what your eyes tell you
Motivation
sometimes.
to respond to it, somebody who uses it locally as an actual
Exactly.
multimodal tool, as opposed to tourists are like, "Psh, I'm not answering this survey, so.
Councilmember Bedley.
So, Sam, when we first talked about this over a year ago, I said for this to work, you guys are going to have to self-regulate. And I'm happy to see that we are getting to the point where you guys are showing an interest in doing that. So it wouldn't be fair to you all if I don't agree to the amendment. But I have to say that if in 2 weeks I don't see a clear improvement, I'm just going to continue with our resolution to ban the scooters. So I really would like you to show us an impeccable as much as possible development of this. So today I'm going to support the second reading, second amendment.
Second substitute.
Say something, Councilman? We appreciate that. The incentive for us here is tremendous. We really want to be here. We don't want for Nashville to throw up their hands. It's, you know, it feels like the easy, politically safe vote today is to say we want a ban. That is not the right thing for Nashville long term. It also keeps the incentive on us to be out on the street in a minimal role to continue to be able to do the things that you've asked us to do. But it also keeps the incentive on the city side. We've seen some improvement with corrals and a number of other things. If these go away and they are banned, what I would view as indefinitely, those incentives go away for the city. And so I think keeping a fleet a minimal size on the road, holding us to super high standards, move to an RFP is the best policy for the city.
So I'll ask you this, and then any other industry representative is free to respond. Why hasn't that happened over the past 30 days when the advisory went out that this was a high risk?
Well, I mean, I think all of us met at length with the mayor's office, submitted several different proposals, and quite frankly, we're a little surprised to get the letter that says we're going to move to an RFP and ask the council to pull everything off the road. You know, look, there's a lot of things that we can do. I think it goes back to the Councilman Elrod's point. There were two companies talking about this back when we were sitting here in August of last year contemplating this. We could not have imagined we would be in this position today. This is a hyper competitive market right now, right? There's a lot of money floating around, a lot of people competing for riders and market share. And with some of the things we've just covered in here about enforcement and competition and the kind of the nature of our city that's unique, some of these problems have become glaring. And yes, there's an election in a few weeks too.
And Mr. Chairman, I would just add that some of your data questions that we haven't brought, we, as an industry, or allege we haven't brought, as an industry, we turn over more data to Metro than, as far as I know, any other industry. And so it's in the repository of the metropolitan government. So I would ask for your help in asking the IT department to present some data to find out what's going on in a visual way where we can all understand it. Because when we see the endpoints on those trips, yes ma'am, when we see those endpoints on the trip, I think that'll give us information on who that rider is.
We're at risk of losing a quorum. It is from 10 till 6. We've got these two. Does anybody in here have burning questions about either of the substitutes? All right, seeing none. Councilmember Elrod's back. We've got 7 members. I would accept a motion. Oh, we've got a motion in a second. Let's vote on the first substitute. All in favor of Councilmember Elrod's first substitute, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. Any abstentions? So I've got 6 in favor, 1 against. Second substitute. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. No. Abstain. 1 abstention. So 4 in favor, 2 against, 1 no vote. All right.
Chair, I would just ask if you would, when you do give the report, just so our body understands that they were both considered, and there were probably some who voted for the first substitute, just to get them both before the council rather than the first substitute was preferred over the second. Like I
can't speak to that. Okay. Mr. Jameson, at this point, both substitutes have been moved in committee and recommended at that level. Do we need to take any other action on the bill as a whole? No. All right. We have now lost our quorum by 3 members, so I guess we could sit and see if anybody comes back. We've got quite a bit of stuff. So the rest of our bills just go with no committee recommendation?
Correct. I think most of them have other committees with recommendations, so you should.
I didn't mean to ignore you. I realized I didn't say how we
Nice to officially meet you.
You live in Englewood,
I live right next door to Rod and Marcia. I'm trying to keep it on the DL that everybody knows